Clashes in Hong Kong are growing more intense as the city marked its 15th consecutive weekend of protests. Dozens of people were injured late last night after protesters gathered outside the legislature and started throwing bricks and petrol bombs at police lines, according to multiple reports. Demonstrators are calling on the government to respond to the protest movement's 5 demands, which includes requests like a direct democratic election for Hong Kong's next leader. And Brian, you spent some time in Hong Kong and have been watching this unfold. And it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. A lot of people thought that once they got that one demand to really talk about extraditions, that it might be going away, but clearly not the case.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in Hong Kong. I'm half Hong Kongese. I'm very aware of the history of Hong Kong. And protests are nothing new. It's been embedded in the Hong Kongese history ever since the territory was taken over by the British in the late 1800s, right? So, I mean, the question here is to what degree are things getting violent or kind of disruptive enough where they might kind of force a conflict with China. And I think that right now you're starting to see that. For the longest time, the biggest benchmark was the umbrella protest in 2014. This, by all standards, I think if you ask anybody, has gotten a lot worse. When you see these these visuals ahead of you, I mean, this is remarkable that these businesses are being destroyed. And, you know, to what degree the protesters have kind of decided that they wanted to go with a more disruptive, more violent attitude in order to catch the attention is one thing. Their demands about trying to get democracy, this is a territory that is controlled by China and is universally recognized around the world as a territory of China. So trying to ask for a democratic election in a country, in a region that's controlled by China is a huge ask and probably unlikely.
Yeah, and one thing I've seen just in protesting in general in the United States, on college campuses, I've covered dozens of these larger protests, maybe not to this scale, but one thing you do see in a lot of these protest situations, they start out peaceful, there's more numbers, there's more of a kind of a positive, singular goal in mind.
Yep.
And we see as these protests draw out longer and longer, they start to get sometimes more violent as the few people remaining are sometimes the most impassioned and sometimes the most extreme. I do think sometimes people see a window towards the end of protests to say, well, we can get away with a little bit more now because they've pushed the envelope, seen what they can do. And so I do see a little bit of similarity, except I think obviously what's being protested for in Hong Kong, a much more cut and dry issue, and seemingly a more noble cause than some of the things that people get outraged on college campuses. But it's interesting to see that pattern emerge here as well.
Yeah, especially, I mean, it's both sides, right? So it's kind of the reaction and then that kind of being the rallying cry there on after. And as we hit 15 weeks of this, it doesn't seem to be going anywhere.